Talk, as you can see on your screen, with the great Bruce Croxon of Round 13 Capital joining us. Bruce, one of the biggest stories in tech right now is the growing Facebook ad boycott. And we've mentioned this morning. Now you've got the big Canadian banks that have been added to the list of big brands that are taking a breather on advertising on Facebook to make a point about their concerns over that platform's support, essentially, of hate speech. What do you make of all these advertisers continuing to line up against Facebook?
Well, John, unfortunately, I think it is more about headlines right now than anything that's going to either force Facebook to change their policy in a hurry, or, as we can see, anything that's going to hurt Facebook financially. Essentially, you've got about 400 brands. Now, they're high-profile brands for sure. So there's a reputational issue, there's a PR issue, but it represents a very, very small percentage of Facebook's overall revenue, which is largely made by catering to roughly 8 million smallish brands, smaller brands, that use it as the primary way of direct response versus brand advertising. So, you know, not unexpectedly, Mark Zuckerberg's reaction so far has been, we don't like people telling us what to do. We will go through the motions of talking with you. We will try and soothe your feelings. But I really believe that he believes that these advertisers will be back soon. And if they're not, it's not an economic issue for Facebook. So very unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, one of my favorite topics that Facebook should be doing more. I don't think this is going to move the needle in a huge way. I remain hopeful.
This has also been a good learning lesson for a lot of people, I think, in how the business of Facebook works. You know, in television, they often talk about how controversy sells. You know, we've had a lot of, reality TV shows that are based on tension and controversy over the years, and a lot of people tune in. Generates pretty good ratings, and generally speaking, the advertisers like that. Facebook's like a real-world example of that. I mean, if people are posting things that are seen as slightly controversial, and someone wants to weigh in and essentially fight with their friends or family, that's ultimately something that qualifies as quote-unquote engagement, Bruce. So it almost feels like we're just getting a sort of a reality check here in what fuels this business.
And sadly, it often passes as news today too, which is really quite a sad commentary. But I think you nailed it, very accurately. It is very similar to television in that their job is to keep people coming to the platform and to keep them there as long as they possibly can. Where you're getting some blowback is that advertisers that are in fact concerned about their brand image, when their ad appears directly opposite something that would be considered hate news or controversial, it does not look good that the brand that you're paying to promote is showing up directly beside it. And that's something that television, as you know, continues to have a lot more control over. And I think this is part of what Facebook is saying, that we may consider giving more control to advertisers about where their ads actually appear, and maybe give them a little bit more control about where it doesn't appear, more importantly. And I think the other thing they continue to come back to is, look, we're going to conduct an audit. We're going to conduct an audit. We're going to look at our practices, but very, very little in the way of tangible action.
And look, I personally think this is a pretty complicated story at the end of the day. I mean, obviously a lot of people are looking for change, but if we're going to be talking about hate speech, one person's hate speech is another person's free speech. So on some levels, you can make the argument that this is the road that Facebook's on. And to your earlier point, there are some investors who are quite all right with that. I mean, the stock this week has been rallying. I mean, it's still a company that's expected to generate something like $75 billion in ad revenue this year alone. It's an astonishing number, but it does look like the growth rate is much slower than what we've seen in the past for Facebook. And I wonder if, you mentioned those smaller and medium-sized advertisers who are already a little stretched right now because of COVID-19. I wonder if in the future we will see other platforms emerge that can be successful with a different style of approach. I mean, you talk to a lot of startup entrepreneurs. Is there a way that social media can be sort of built in the future that avoids this issue, which, obviously, clearly a growing number of brands are uncomfortable with?
Yeah, good point. And one thing that I wanted to mention is one positive thing that may come out of all of this is, as you know, and we've discussed, there are a number of antitrust conversations going on. So to the extent that some very large brands in the United States are saying, look, enough about Facebook's practices, let's see if it lasts past July. But for now, there's a lot of noise. So that's one more influential group that the government doesn't have to worry as much about affecting if they were to come down harder on the fact that Facebook and Google, between them, control 80+% of the online ad market. So yes, I think there are other ways. From a direct response basis, do the roughly 8 million customers care enough to come off what is a decreasing probably price to reach those customers as a few less big spenders spend on the Facebook platform? I don't think that happens anytime quickly. And as you can imagine, it's a much more impactful story to brand advertisers find it a lot easier to come off the platform than do direct response advertisers that depend on a certain number of views, a certain number of conversions to make their monthly numbers. So I don't see that change happening anytime soon. As I said earlier, with this much noise, I remain hopeful. I'm more hopeful than I was, say, even 30 days ago, that this is getting so much attention.
All right, Bruce, thanks a lot. We'll see what happens with those 8 million advertisers, to your point. Bruce Croxon joining us. Of course, they got 2.5 billion users around the world. Let's not forget, it's also a matter of whether those people stay engaged on the platform, which will determine what happens with the business. Bruce Croxon of Round 13 Capital joining us.